Thank you. Sorry, we will be here afterwards. You can chat later. But my name is Sarah Danziger. I'm on my tippy toes to try not to move, but I'm gonna move it a little bit. I'm the education coordinator here at CPW. You're here for Meet the Artist Night. It is our weekly artist talk where we feature local or visiting artists here in the Hudson Valley. Next week will be our artist in residence, so that'll be exciting. But this week, we're really lucky to be joined by Andrew Moore, who's also our neighbor, and Charles Purvis, who launched the beginning of our summer workshop series last night, which was how to write about your photography. That was fun. We have a full summer of workshops here, so please, if you don't know about them, please take a look. Couple announcements before I get started. I want to promote a friend of CPW, Edward Hubert, show that is opened in Newburgh. It's at the ADS Warehouse Gallery on 105 Ann Street in Newburgh. It runs through June 17th. If you have any questions, here's the man himself. Please get over there. We also have an opening this Saturday from 5 to 7. Only open your eyes a little bit and peek at the show, but if Adam had his way, we would not have artist talks in the middle of an install, but here we are. Let me read a little bit about someone you probably already know about. Right, you sent me separate. Excuse me. All right, Andrew Moore. Born 1957, is widely acclaimed for his photographic series, usually taken over many years, which record the effect of time on the natural and built landscape. Moore's photographs are held in collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the National Gallery of Art, the Yale University Art Gallery, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the Library of Congress, amongst many other institutions. He received a fellowship from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation in 2014, as well as grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the New York State Council for the Arts, and the J.M. Kaplan Fund. His publications include right over here for very decent price of $45. His publications include Blue Alabama, published in 2019, Dirt Meridian, published in 2015, Cuba, 2012, and Detroit Disassembled, 2010, Governor's Island, 2004, Russia, 2005, and Inside Havana, 2002, 4 of which are featured here. We also are really excited to announce that Andrew's going to be doing a workshop next week called, what do we call it? Picturing the Hudson Valley, and we'll be exploring that through the lens of large format. So we'll be on site doing out in the field doing shoots, and also at Andrew's studio. He's nice enough to host us over there. There are some spaces available. We also do have quite a collection of our own 4x5 cameras. So if this is something that you want to explore, but you don't have a camera, please just let me know. We also have financial assistance. So if the price tag is a little high, just email me at education@cpw.org and we got you. Can we give a warm welcome to our friend Andrew?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, CPW. I'm really delighted to be here. Just a little introduction. I moved to Kingston in the summer of 2019. I literally, my studio is like 2 minutes over here. And so when CPW moved to Kingston, I was thrilled to have them as neighbors and now to be speaking here. And I'm really looking forward to being part of this community. And I'm glad that for all of you to come tonight, thank you. And I feel like this is just a growing community of photographers and people interested in picture making. And I'm just delighted to be part of that. In terms of tonight, I'm going to do something a little different. Normally, when I give a talk, I usually will present some of my various portfolios, whether it's Cuba or Russia or Bosnia or various places I've been. But tonight, I thought I'd kind of do a more close examination of what place means to me and how I examine the nature of place. And so kind of just get more deeply into a couple of early projects. And then in the second half, I'm going to present my new body work, which is pictures of the Hudson Valley, which I haven't really shown yet before. So you guys will be the kind of first audience of that work, so to speak. So with no further ado, my dad was an architect. I studied architecture, although I never became an architect, for better or worse. But I love architecture. I love the effect of time on architecture. I love the way that creates stories. And so you'll see throughout my work, I'm very interested in homes and houses and getting inside to people's houses and how houses are set. And I think one of the things that's kind of uniquely American is this idea of the big house. I mean, you have the log cabin in the woods, but later on that evolves into like the grand house in the middle of nowhere. And I've always been interested in isolated houses, kind of the mystery that they have, or the house on the hill, like in Psycho. But those are, even in the movie Giant or Days of Heaven, those are sets. But when I was working out in Nebraska, I actually found real examples of these homes. These are kind of like prairie castles set out in the middle of nowhere. Now, it turns out that in 1908, the same year that Henry Ford brought out the Model T Ford, Sears in their catalog introduced a line of houses. So for around $2,000, you could order a house, and about a month later at the local depot, 3 rail cars would show up with everything you needed to build a house, including a doorbell and roof shingles and everything. And you had a book with your name inscribed on it and all the instructions. It said, don't listen to anybody else, just follow the instructions. And they said, weather permitting, it would take you about 3 months to build your house. So this particular house is actually constructed of cement blocks that were made from the sand on which the ground sits. Now, just to explain a little bit more about where we are. So this is, if you think about Nebraska, the state of Nebraska, we think it's square. But in the northwest corner of it, there's a little panhandle. And that's called the Sand Hills. And that was originally known as the Great American Desert because it was just rolling sand dunes. And eventually that grassed over and became very good cattle country. Now, this is also, if you've ever been to the Badlands of South Dakota, this is directly below that. So these houses, this one is from, I believe, 1911, and it says Murray on the lintel. As I said, Sears would sell you a kind of block making machine. So you took the sand and you mixed it with some cement, you made the blocks on site, and you constructed your own house. So when I first found this house, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I have to find the right way to make a picture of this. And then to the side of it in the back was this great cottonwood tree leaning over this watering hole with the windmill in the background. I was like, okay, I've got to combine all those elements together. So I spent like 2 years just photographing this house repeatedly, trying to get it right, trying to figure out a way to incorporate all these elements. And then I tried panoramas. I got up at 4 a.m. and drove 2 hours to be here for sunrise. This is a little later in the afternoon, just trying to find the right formulation. So this idea of taking a subject and repeatedly photographing it to get kind of deeper into to understand it is one of the essential processes for me to understand a place. So I eventually ended up with this photograph, which an art critic in New York said was a combination of Salvador Dali and Andrew Wyeth. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. You know? But this had the kind of the right configuration showing the sparseness of the landscape, the tree, of course, the windmill. Some of those other trees had been cut down somehow during the process. But anyway, so that just took me like 2 years to kind of come up with this photograph. Now, another example was this house. This is actually in South Dakota. This house is made of wood, obviously. I think this was called the Chelsea model in the Sears catalog. And again, sitting out all by itself. Now, one of the reasons why you don't find these kinds of homes in these isolated positions east of the Missouri River is because that's farmland. And farmers use every square inch of the land they can. But the ranchers, they don't care. It's so much effort to knock it down, so they'll just leave it and let the cows run around it. So here's an aerial view of the same house. You can see some vultures on the roof. And actually, with the pilot, I wanted to fly lower, but there's telephone wires here. So it couldn't really fly that low. And plus, like the first pass, the vultures took off. But, that would have been a little different angle, would have also made a great picture. Again, exploring the kind of panoramic format of the house. And then I think in the book, I ended up using this picture just because of the simplicity of it. But again, I like to go back and revisit things and rework them. And it's just, when I was young, when I would take a good picture of a place, I would never go back. I'm really like, I'm done, not going back. And I feel sort of stupid now because those are really good spots. I could have made more pictures in those places. But, you learn. Here's another house. I call this the 10 dormer house. And you can see here, I've got a pole and I put the camera up like 40 feet on this extremely heavy, but basically a light stand that weighed like 60 pounds. And to lift that last section, it was like, it took two of us. I mean, it was really, really heavy. The biggest problem, the pole seemed like a good idea to kind of get up a little bit because there's no hills, obviously, to get. But the problem was that I'd get the pole up and then I'd be like, it's got to be like 3 feet over there. Bring it down, move over, put it back up. I mean, it was, so it just turned out to be, I think your working method should let you flow. It shouldn't be so laborious. A couple other views of the house. This is obviously sunset. This is before storm, obviously. And again, the tree is kind of an important element, as you'll see in this next slide, also taken from from the plane also, how the tree shaded the house so poignantly. So this is basically a kind of treeless landscape, except where there's sort of breaks, where there's a little stream, or they're called wind breaks, kind of break the wind coming across. And this is the picture I ended up using in the book. I just like the simplicity of it. After all those laborious efforts, I just like the sort of simplicity of the way this sat on the land, showing the trees, the sparseness, and the openness of the sky. Because the project really was about photographing nothingness, photographing empty space. Because you go out to that landscape, this is the high plains, and there's a kind of euphoria that I felt with all that open space. It's also kind of terrifying at the same time, but I liked that sense of emptiness, and it's very hard to convey that in a photograph. And that's why the Dirt Meridian book took me about 10 years to really kind of get a handle on. And part of it was meeting this pilot. So another example, this is what it looks like when there's a drought out there. I mean, this is the middle of the country, and this would have been normally very lush green. I mean, it looks like Mars. And this little building, that's a one-room schoolhouse, and it served the ranching families that lived around it. So they would ride their horseback to the school. And it was closed in the 60s, but the family whose land that is on had kept up the roof and kind of kept up the interior. So this pilot that I met, Doug Dean, he was a crop duster. So amazing pilots. I mean, they fly 10 feet off the ground all summer long, and just incredible pilot. And so we put on these big kind of marshmallow tires on the plane so we could land close to some of these places. And later on, we actually mounted the camera onto the strut of the plane. And then wired everything through into the cockpit so I could shoot remotely. But actually inside that schoolhouse was this amazing blackboard. I mean, so the school had closed in the late 60s, but the kids who had gone to school there would come back, and then they'd write their name on it. And then at the same time, there was a bird living in this corner up here. So as the bird would fly to its nest, it would poop. So it's like an poop action painting, sort of, Jackson Pollock, Twombly, man and nature all together. But I would have never found this without that ability to fly. And then here's another example. So this is a former bootlegger's house. Shot this obviously from the ground, has a kind of Bonnie and Clyde like feeling, like very desiccated, very dry, sort of like Texas. And then, but from the plane, it became this picture. That's the same house. And here it just becomes about the geometry and the shape making. And I'm going to talk more about that, but shape making is a very important part of my photographic process. I'm trying to make a lot of shapes. I'm trying to make geometrically interesting shapes that all kind of fit together. And when I saw this pop up on the screen when I was shooting, I was like, oh my God, that's kind of a miracle. But you have to imagine I'm going 70 miles in an airplane. And so the picture, there's a lot of luck in that. There's a lot of serendipity. I mean, I kind of saw it, but it also sort of happened at the same time. So that's talking, so in terms of place, that's about revisiting a place again and again until I get it right, until I feel like I really made the picture that I wanted to. And there's a certain amount of luck involved in that. Okay, moving forward. So this is a project that came after the Dirt Meridian project. This is called Blue, Alabama. And this is in what's called Lower Alabama, a place called Lower Peachtree, in fact. And this is my friend Pearlie outside of her home. This house is probably built in around the 1850s, built of heart pine, which is the very ancient pine trees, the 300 or 400-year-old pine trees that were very dense. And when they cut boards from it, I mean, they used it for ship mast. That was one of the things it was very valuable for. But this house is made of unfinished heart pine. It's like 150 years old now, and it's aged to this beautiful sort of chestnut black. Anyway, this house stood up on a hill and quite a bit back from the road. And my friend Lucy Hicks, who was helping me with this project in Alabama, she'd seen it for a long time. And she goes, "Oh, that's an interesting house." I go, "Yeah, that's we got to go there. We have to go there." And so we drove up one day very carefully, parked quite a distance from the house, got out very slowly because this is Alabama. Just don't know what you're gonna encounter. And this woman comes out, Pearlie, and she got a little gun tucked under her hip, and she says, and I can't really do her accent. I'll play her voice in a second, but she goes, "Before I talk to strangers, I just have one question." She goes, "Do you know the Lord?" And I looked over and I'm like, "Yes, ma'am." And then it was all good. So this is the picture. This is the first day oops, sorry. This always confuses me. Oh, so she was from Mobile. So I just want to play what her voice sounded like.
If I talk about this broom, and I had never had anything to do with a broom, I would just know that it was possible for somebody to have a broom to sweep a yard with. But if I make one myself, I know how it was done and I know what to do. If you make it, you know it. I mean, there's no mystery about it then, If somebody said, people made brooms out of huckleberry bushes and swept the yard with it. Okay, you know that. But that's all you know. You don't know beyond that. But now he knows beyond that. See, he's sweeping the yard. Now, ain't that something? I don't care how big their lawn was. They swept the whole thing. They might not hold out to sweep the whole thing in one day, but they'd come back the next day and sweep the rest of it.
So sweeping the yard, that's the thing. That actually comes from Africa, but basically you would take a broom or whatever you had, and you'd have a hard-packed dirt all around your house. And that was because of fire and also snakes. So it kind of kept everything. So she's talking about that. Anyway, that's Pearlie and her pets. And she became like the grandma that I never had. She's like my country grandma. But that first day, she didn't let me in her house. I was like, okay, just going to photograph you with your chickens. I went back a few months later. I went to church with her. I photographed her all dressed up at church. I photographed the reverend. They had lunch, and then she goes, "Okay, you can come back to my house." So this is her living room. She had a squirrel in a cage. She had a lot of animals. She had a duck once that liked to watch TV. She found a deer, a fawn that she bottle fed in this room. The fawn lived there for a year, and when it got too big, went out in the yard. The fawn just lived in her yard for the rest of its life. I mean, this woman loved animals. The squirrel was a little intense, like it had super sharp claws. So it got out once and it like tore up my assistant's neck with its claws. So it was probably better in a cage, but it was kind of a crazy animal. She loved videotapes, especially Westerns. Chuck Norris was her favorite. She always had on a Western on the television because she liked horses, She had been married for many years. Her husband had passed away about 7 years, so she was living by herself, all alone, in really the kind of middle of nowhere. This had been her daughter's room at one point. I think her daughter had passed away. There were some things she was kind of mysterious about. She also had a son who lived not too far away that she never, ever talked about. So this woman, she had a lot of secrets. This was her bedroom. You can see Chuck Norris in the back there. Dolls with the red eyes because they're all bleached out. There were a lot of those around. The gun, actually, that's just an ashtray. It's not a real gun, but you get the idea. So eventually I got to hold the chickens. I brought my family to visit her. I must have been there, 20 times. I talked to her on the phone very often. One time when I went a few weeks before, she'd gone to her doctor's and she stepped on the wrong pedal and driven through into the waiting room of the doctor's office. There's the tire treads there on the floor. So I went to the doctor's office. Interesting, in rural Alabama, the doctor was from India. He was cool. Everyone liked him, Dr. Darji. But eventually I got to see, what was super special were these two rooms in the front of her house that she and her husband had never really touched, just kind of left. And she said to me, I never understood why my husband and I never renovated those rooms, but now I understand. She said, God sent you to photograph my house. I was like, well, I didn't know God hired photographers. I certainly. So this is kind of one angle. That's an old wasp nest where a bird had gotten in and kind of eaten part of the nest. The television they never watched. They just bought the television because they liked the way it looked in the room. Just decor. Same thing with the records. So this is one of the pictures I ended up making. It's kind of Walker Evans in color, but that color of that wood. I mean, I'm a color photographer. I always have been. For me, color is the first thing that you absorb into a picture. It's just that thing that seduces you, and the color of this wood is just so extraordinary. And then the other view was this, which is like the front bedroom. It's actually not a very big room, and I must have photographed this room half a dozen times, just trying to get it right. One of the big problems was the window, because it was so dark. I needed to do a super long exposure, but this open light of the window really would always mess up. It would cause flares and everything. So eventually I came up with this solution. You see what I did? Took the books, piled them on top of the dresser. Still looks fine. You believe it. Blocked the light. Could make the picture. Anyway. And by the way, this white marks on the wall, that's from in the old days when people had bed bugs. What they would do is they would take lye and splash it on the walls of the room to get rid of the bed bugs. So I like the fact, all these kind of incremental things. And this is the outside of her house. And I eventually learned that the best way to photograph a really dark house is in the moonlight. Somehow it just kind of suits it in its style. And the house was called Broken Arrow in homage to all the Westerns that they liked. Anyway, so Nebraska, Alabama. 2019, move up to the Hudson Valley. Sold the apartment in the city. I'm up here. I have a studio in Kingston here. And then a few months later, we get to, the world changes. This is my daughter outside. This is actually near the internet. Now, a lot of you are going to notice or recognize places because I was forced is maybe the wrong word. I just felt like I'm going to just explore where I live. I'm not going to go to some remote place. I'm going to just deal with what's around me in the way that I think is possible. So I just started photographing Kingston, and I go to Troy, and went to Albany and Newburgh, and so I just started wandering around. I think one of these is in Tivoli. This is here in Kingston on the right. This woman, I mean, she said she was living in Mexico, but visiting her son in Kingston. I mean, everybody was just kind of wandering. There was a kind of driftless. So I was sort of kind of drifting along with the currents. This is up in Cojos, and I saw this kid out of the corner of my eye, the kid with purple hair. I'm like, okay, if I look, he's going to disappear. So I just sort of turned the camera, took a picture, and then I went to look at the camera to actually frame it, and he disappeared. So, you know, that's often the case with, you know, like just the observation of a moment will change it so entirely. This is in northern Troy. This had been formerly a Irish social club. Now it's owned by an artist sculptor. And he hung this huge impromptu Biden sign, which someone compared to help scratched into the beach of an abandoned island, you know, where the guy was going, help. So, yeah, good. Thank you. Anyway, so help yourself. This is also in Cojos. This is a former armory that this couple bought, and they were in the circus business. So interior, I'm kind of waiting on that, but I love just finding these different places. This is actually a mansion in Rhinebeck that they're trying to turn into apartments. It's actually just empty and abandoned, but their kids had been breaking into it and stealing things, so they hired this dude to kind of scare everybody away. And meanwhile, he was keeping all his motorcycles in this mansion, so you can see the grand piano and all his motorcycles. And I like these characters. And of course, for me, low-hanging fruit, old kind of weird houses. So, you know, witches against racism. This was this great house in Rhinebeck that was painted this incredible kind of eggplant, sort of like worn eggplant, and then they painted it white. But anyway, I love the color of that house. And then trying to get inside, you know, beds with tiny suitcases, love seats in a fraternity in Troy. And this, my Stanley Kubrick, William Eggleston, you know, this is up in Tannersville. Grand houses. I mean, so I was kind of going back to my old tropes, like old houses, creepy interiors, weird people, you know, all the things that I really, really like. And then, of course, this, you know, this is like bridal suite that looks like something out of Great Expectations, and with the giant icicle hanging down like the sword of Damocles, you know, over this bed. Even has like a little yellow rose here. But I felt like I kind of knew these things. Was sort of not retreading old paths, but I had done things like this perhaps a little better. I wanted to find it as like a slightly different way to approach where I was living. So, of course, the walkway, Rhinecliff, is just fantastic. I love that. I could photograph that all day long. But this is, you know, those foggy October mornings. You get up early, it's still warm, it's still dark. It's so, I mean, if we just had a year of warm October mornings, I'd be happy. Here's some kids. This is I think this was in the summer. Some kids who just finished swimming in the Hudson. I was walking by my neighbor's house and I saw this car. I'm like, oh, what is that? And then it turned out to be a Jaguar from like 63 or something, that the woman's brother who died had never finished, and so they had just sort of left it. They're called barn finds. So this is my barn find photograph, you know, with the Jag. And then houses on hills, you know. Do you know where this is the mobile station when you get off the Rhinecliff Bridge, the first exit? I love that. I went up, I met the guy. He's a total nut job. I mean, this has a slate roof. I mean, he did the roof with a hammer to make the little holes in the slate. I mean, it's a sort of second empire. You know, it's not completely detailed, but I like the situation of it. I photographed this place probably a dozen times. I have to say, and now this is not finished, but I sort of came up with something like this. I never finished the picture, but you know, it's sort of interesting. A little HDR in the gas station, but you know, I liked. It wasn't quite spooky enough, but I like the color. So then, getting to know a place. So I'm photographing these places obsessively. This is in 12th Street. This was one of the very first pictures I made in Kingston. What I didn't realize was that 2 years later, just like 3 minutes from this house, there's these amazing caves, right? And so it was like, oh, I didn't know that. How did I not know that? How did I not get there? So it's great. I mean, to get to know a place, to really investigate it, to go back again and again. I really feel like that's the only way. So eventually, you know, I started dealing with the actual landscape up here, like what it is. And of course, you know, one confronts the whole Hudson River School tradition, you know, and what that means. And I feel, you know, this is where I entered a lot of doubts in my mind. This is where there's a new territory for me because I'm not a landscape photographer. As you see, I like structures, I like interiors, I like characters. And so just dealing with a landscape was super challenging. But the ideas of the Hudson River School of like having a low foreground, having a figure, having a midground, having a lot of deep space. I mean, those are kind of eternal formulations for a powerful landscape photograph. So I started working with that. The one on the right, that's actually Kingston, probably 1850. This is a view from Milan looking back towards Kingston and Saugerties. And you see there's a guy here taking a picture with his iPhone. You can actually see the houses and the cars. So trying to incorporate some modern elements. But I ultimately began to feel like that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. That these people had done all this amazing work. Why can't I just take some of those ideas and then try to reinvent them as best I could? Because the shapes are old in a sense, but the tools are new. So these new tools, and I'm talking about digital photography, photography, digital photography, Photoshop, everything allows us to do things in a different way. So Thomas Cole, this is my picture of Platte Clove, one of my favorite places up here. And this idea that this is a synthetic view that they would do, that they would draw, they would sketch, and then later in the studio, recombine, recomposite in a sense. You know, you can do that in a painting very readily, whereas in photography, because it's so precise, it's much more difficult to do that. But we have different tools. We have different kinds of tools. This is also Platte Clove, Bridal Veil Falls. It's so exotic. It feels like one's in, you know, Venezuela or something. So I love the variety of the landscape. I like the epic weather that's here. I like change of seasons. So this is a Durand, a view of Troy, and this is my view of Troy. You know, and often, if I don't have a foreground, then I may use trees as a screen to create something very close, a plane very close, and then look through that. This is a view from Hasbrook, the one on the right. This is my view of Hasbrook from this right over here, Hasbrook Park. And again, Hasbrook is a place that I photographed many times over and over. Fall, middle winter. And then sometimes I would just randomly, like the other day, I just came across this picture, which I actually quite like, which is probably kind of an off, you know, where I just jiggled the camera, but I like that I'm not overthinking it. I'm not over-composing. I think that's one of the problems. If it's too painterly, it becomes too much like a painting. You know, I have to keep it loose, have to keep some kind of spontaneous element. You know? It's also, I think, the Durand. This is Rhinecliff, I believe, which is crazy to think that's Rhinecliff. You know, this is Kingston. Sojourner Truth Park, one of my favorite places in Kingston. I love the shoreline. I love, actually, one of my favorite places, one of my favorite situations to photograph up here is the shoreline of the river itself, especially when it has a kind of wild element. In this case, there's all these industrial bits and pieces in here, barges and piers and so forth. Even you can see it here, all the bricks. So this is really a reclaimed landscape. This has been industrialized and sort of reclaimed by nature. It's a picture about photography. It's a picture of someone making a picture. It's also obviously a homage to the Hudson River School. And it's, in a weird way, it's a kind of self-portrait, even though I don't really do self-portraits and it's not me. The other thing I should talk about or point out in terms of that, you know, how painters would sketch and then sort of interweave certain sketches, certain places together. Here, what I've done is I've did the sort of the top of the picture, there's a high sun involved. And then the light got lower and I did a second exposure. So the light here is different than the light up here. I mean, you don't really, if I tell you, you know it, or you barely even see it, but using what a photograph can do, which is to work with the light to melt it. And that's why there's no seam lines, because it's just, I'm just merging different light together. Right? So it is synthetic in a sense, like a painting might be.
Analog 4x5.
High resolution digital.
So, okay, and then layer masks.
All kinds, there's a million ways to do it.
Okay.
A million ways to do it. But the point is, unlike film, we'll get with super nerdy here. Unlike film, where if you shoot one sheet and then you shoot a second sheet, even without moving the camera, the sheet will shift a little bit. It won't line up perfectly. But with the digital back, it's perfect, the seaming.
We'll leave the discussion for later.
No, it's okay. You can interrupt me. It's fine.
There's this German guy who takes successive exposures on one piece of film and analog. Once the piece of film is exposed, you can't expose over it. But if there's still some unexposed film, you can expose into it.
Correct.
So he has these weird twilight scenes where it's a late afternoon sky, and then the sky goes black, so the late afternoon stays, but then the lights in the houses come out. But there's still some light on the houses, so it's this weird twilight thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work. You have one sheet of film and you're dodging it in front of the lens. Yeah, you can do it.
No, he's just taking it. He says out of 3 times, 2 times he failed.
Yeah, yeah.
But he basically uses the property of film and analog film versus digital. You can't do that.
I don't agree with that. I mean,
It's like on the camera, you only get it one set, and they do it, how you reproduce it, and then like if you borrow a film or a CD, and then you cycle away from the cycle, then you come back and picture you today, the 2 pictures. But he said tiny something.
yeah, I'm a little lost in all that, but I really don't think it matters how you get to where you're going. It's just getting there. You know, I mean, I could have shot this on 4x5 film. I could have scanned it. I could have done other things. I could have probably, you know, I'm probably a good enough large format photographer that I could have like dodged out the bottom, waited, and burnt in the top on one sheet of film. I you know, it's possible, but I'm looking for something that's fluid. I mean, I didn't actually know I was going to do that until later. Just like, you know, Thomas Cole said, I don't paint right away when I come home with my sketches. I let sort of things digest, and I think that's a big part of this process. View towards Olana, you know, sort of early winter. You know, I like the red green. Again, I'm often using complementary colors. You can see, you know, red green and then yellow blue. You know, these are often very deliberate, I would say, those kinds of choices. Burger Hill. And what's interesting to me is someone was saying, oh, I don't like those McMansions. I think it's interesting. These are sort of late 90s, early 2000 McMansions. And then this is like the new architecture, you know, small windows, energy efficient, sort of barn style. So I think these they tell stories no matter whether you're trying to tell us that story or not. It's always, there's information always in the picture. Berrytown. I love the train. I mean, who would, you know, I'm just a sucker for this picture. Feels like a illustration from a children's book, but I love the heron here. You can see the lights of the city in the backdrop. Obviously, the train crossing that little isthmus. Yeah, I'm looking for, you know, to kind of bring the landscape to life in a sense. All right, so the last two pictures I'm just going to show. I don't think I need to talk over them. These are pictures probably shot in the last 6 months. So. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Now, when you ever see a print of this, I'm talking, sorry. This is my first kind of version of this picture. The actual picture is actually quite a bit darker. It's a little bit more moody. I mean, I feel like we are kind of the sheep in a sense in this picture. I'm not uncertain about what's ahead of us. This is in Rhinebeck. It's a grove of black walnut trees. Planted. I mean, this is a human, someone planted this. This is, you know, a sculpture. They're called stick? Cool. That's the quarry in Kingston. You know the one off 9W? What's that? Where I took the picture from?
No, where you're pointing, where that light is.
No, what's the big Carnahan? The big quarry. It's off 9G? 9W? The one that's next to Sojourner Truth. Yeah, they work all night, or their lights are on. I would love to sneak in there because they have some awesome views, especially in the wintertime. It does say there's a gate. It says no photography, no video, of course. Got it. Just keep going. Yeah. But another, you know, not, you know, speaking, I love film, and those past two projects that I showed you, a lot of that is film. But it was virtually dark when I took this picture. I mean, digital cameras, they just count photons. I mean, you're in the dark, and it's just seeing in the dark. It's not possible with film. That's what I'm saying. New tools allowing us to do new things. I mean, that's what we're here for.
Well, yeah, so much immediately. That digital color for validation.
It's like the screen. I mean, it's a little blown out, honestly. It should be more subtle. And sometimes I just said, screw it. I'm just going to make beautiful pictures. I'm not going to get worked up about trying to tell a mess. You know, just enjoy the pure process of making something that I think is beautiful. No, this place? Kingston Point? As was the last one. There's also Kingston Point. This is in Rhinebeck. This is Bly Marsh. Amazing place. Kingston Point. Also Kingston Point. I love Kingston Point, obviously. And low tide. I love shooting at low tide. Another great example, low tide on the river. I have a tide chart. I love, you know, what it just creates like a landscape that didn't exist before. You're like, well, I didn't see that last time I was here. So it allows you to get different perspectives. And, you know, I love my ducks, of course. You know, I got ducks. You know, there's a lot of birds. I like sneaking things into. I hide a lot of things in my pictures, to be honest. The caves. Remember the caves? Nearby. Bluestone Quarry. Man-made. Abandoned. Crazy. I just found this picture. I didn't, you know. No, that's a fire truck actually making those. But I like the railroad tracks. You know, in certain 19th century photographs, I think Watkins has some great pictures, I think in Oregon, of like the railroad tracks and a big piece of rock or something. I love putting that in the, like really low in the foreground, having those tracks. A little bit of cotton candy. I don't love the bench, but I can live with it. I can live with it. Anyway, I just want to conclude by saying that I really appreciate you all coming. I'm so happy to answer any questions. And, you know, thank you for being my first audience of these pictures. I appreciate it.